A shadow swallows the sun. A king vanishes, and far from panicking, a scribe calmly notes on clay, as foretold. In the ancient Middle East, prophecy wasn't wild guesswork, it was a system. From Sumerian eclipse charts to Egyptian dream books, people tracked omens like data. Empires sometimes launched wars by starlight. Farmers read the sky like scripture, and families decoded fate at breakfast. Why? Because survival depended on spotting the signs, not magic, method. And not just for kings, for everyone. Today, we're decoding how ancient prophecy actually worked, which predictions changed real history, and why their core storylines, chaos, unity, and rebirth, still echo in climate stress, tech disruption, and global politics. These weren't just forecasts, they were survival manuals. This is Armchair Archaeology, where ancient wisdom meets modern chaos, and every artifact tells a story that still matters. Stick around to the end, because I'll reveal the surreal, sneaky trick ancient kings used to dodge a death prophecy, and how we still copy it today.
Prophecy in the ancient Middle East didn't usually roar from mountaintops. It accumulated on shelves. Court scholars copied and recopied vast omen catalogs, most famously the massive Babylonian series Enuma Anu Enlil, that read like conditional code. If an eclipse bites the western rim, the ruler is endangered. If a lamb is born with an extra toe, border trouble gathers. Skies, storms, animal births, royal dreams, each filed under headings so a palace could consult the right page when the world tilted. This wasn't mystic mumbling, it was a repeatable process, almost bureaucratic. Life, of course, refused to stay inside the columns. Favorable stars might arrive the same night a sacrificial liver showed a troubling mark. The tablet imagined one quake, and the city shuddered twice. Instead of surrendering to contradiction, scholars treated signs like evidence. They compared precedents, ranked severity, cross-checked methods, and recorded outcomes. Colophons, those neat notes at the end of tablets, name the scribe, the source, sometimes even whether a reading had been tested in practice. The clay remembers more than words. Under raking light, you can make out the ridges of a fingertip where a copyist steadied the line, an imprint from a night when someone decided whether to march an army or hold it at the gate. From these lists grew machinery. Palaces maintained omen rooms, watchers logged sky reports to a schedule, messengers sprinted with times and directions. A malign sign triggered procedures: postpone a coronation, delay a treaty, commission a counter-ritual, or seek a second opinion through lots, dreams, or extispicy, liver reading by a trained priest. Over years, feedback hardened into guidance. Anomalies were annotated, entries corrected, rules refined. What outsiders might wave away as superstition functioned as statecraft. The power didn't come from any single sign, but from the archive, and from the willingness to act when patterns lined up. In practice, prophecy behaved less like magic than like an operating system. Memory and execution under pressure.
Prophecies earn their power the way weather apps do. A few eerily accurate calls remembered forever. In Assyria, palace archives preserve oracles from Ishtar's temple at Arbela, speaking directly to a nervous prince. Your rivals will fail, the throne will be yours. Not long after, Sennacherib was murdered, rival brothers moved first, and the younger son, Esarhaddon, fought back and took the crown. And the prophecy? It didn't just predict the future, it helped shape it. In the files, the prophecies keep addressing him as "my king," even before his coronation. Once events matched the words,
That voice from the shrine sounded less like poetry and more like policy. In Judah, street preacher prophecy carried a different edge. Texts attributed to Jeremiah warned that injustice and idolatry would hollow the city until Babylon finished the job. When Jerusalem fell in 586 BCE and its elite were marched into exile, a mass deportation, the survivors read the ruins backward. The warnings hadn't been bluster, they were diagnosis. The prophetic voice hardened because reality echoed its themes. Egypt framed fulfillment with theater. The prophecy of Nefertiti paints a nation in chaos until a savior king called Ameni restores order. Composed to legitimize the 12th dynasty, it reads like an old prediction come true under Amenemhat I, retroactive, engineered, and effective. Court poets staged providence. Audiences saw destiny confirmed. And in Babylon, theology met geopolitics. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay inscription justifying Cyrus's rule, tells how Marduk abandoned Nabonidus and chose Cyrus to enter Babylon without a fight. Coupled with omen lists linking eclipses and temple neglect to royal misfortune, Cyrus's victory felt pre-scripted. Scholars didn't just note events, they slotted them into a scaffold that made the outcome look inevitable. Once a handful of episodes lined up, names anticipated, collapses framed as warned of, restorations cast as promised, the ledger tilted. Kings funded more diviners, generals waited for better skies, scribes expanded the lists. Prophecy didn't need to nail every detail, it only needed to be right often enough, at dramatic moments, for memory and power to do the rest. If uncovering the hidden logic behind civilizations reshapes how you see the past, subscribe to keep following the trail.
On clear nights, royal watchers climbed stair-stepped towers and faced the horizon like sentries. Their brief wasn't poetry, it was logistics. Note the time, the direction, the color, whether Venus rose sharp or blurred, whether the moon's bite came from east or west. In the omen lists, every detail mattered. An eclipse at moonrise in the west threatened a king. A shadow from the north spelled danger for northern provinces. The sky became a map of risk. Astral signs didn't float above politics, they steered it. When tablets forecast a hazardous window, armies lingered in camp and coronations slid on the calendar. Assyrian letters are full of hedged optimism. The stars are favorable, but the moon is uncertain, and policy followed the most serious warning. Venus mattered too. A Babylonian series attributed to King Amisaduqa, an early ruler famous for meticulous Venus records, tracked her first and last sightings across decades, building a tempo counselors treated like a barometer for campaigns and treaties. When Venus missed a beat or reappeared in an unlucky quadrant, couriers left with new instructions. The system wasn't flawless. Clouds obscured crucial risings, dust bled the stars, and the same eclipse could imply conflicting dangers if you misjudged its arc. So, scholars compensated. They logged cloud cover and wind, compared notes from different cities, and looked for convergences. Astral data aligned with dreams, livers, or past outcomes. In Babylon's astronomical diaries, a line about the moon's horns sits beside a note on grain prices, as if to admit that heaven and marketplace move together. What makes these records feel modern isn't the mystique, but the method. Serial observation, standardized formats, and rules for action turned starlight into statecraft. A smear in the margins where a scribe steadied his hand, a rushed correction beside an eclipse time, little traces of the pressure to get it right, when a crown or a harvest budget depended on the reading. In practice, the sky was less an oracle than a dashboard, and good governance meant knowing when a dimmed planet or a bitten moon demanded patience instead of bravado. Crafted for those who still chase what history leaves half-buried, the Ancient Secrets mug, Armchair Archaeology Edition, is available through the link in the pinned comment. A small, tangible echo of the discoveries we uncover here.
Night in the Nile Valley carried its own bureaucracy. While palaces tracked the heavens, households tracked their sleep, keeping dream books that translated midnight images into daylight advice. The best-known papyri, copied in tidy columns, list scenes in a simple rhythm. If a man sees himself doing X, it means Y. Not delirium. Classification. Entries split into auspicious and inauspicious, often marked right and left because direction carried moral weight. Wake up, check the column, plan the day. Dreams rarely matched life cleanly. A farmer might dream of water, which could promise abundance or warn of floods. A bride might dream of a crocodile, terrifying at first glance, yet some guides read it as success and authority. Readers learned the code. Symbols don't mean what they look like, they mean what tradition says they mean. One line quietly notes that seeing oneself dead is good, read as a long life. The shock fades once you see the logic. Inversion calms the anxious mind, turns fear into a pledge of survival, and sends you to the fields with steadier hands. Temples offered upgrades. Petitioners slept in sanctuaries of healing gods like Imhotep or Serapis, hoping for a prescriptive dream, what remedy to use, which vow to make. Priests curated the setting, incense, chanting, sacred images to steer the night toward clarity. At home, families tucked protective charms near the bed, everyday insurance against bad omens. In the morning, a dream wasn't a monologue from the soul. It was a data point to weigh with the season, the market, and yesterday's news from the river. No different in spirit than checking a phone app before a big decision. What holds this together is procedure. Copyists kept manuals neat. Marginal notes tightened slippery phrases. Readers practiced translating terror into action. Postpone a journey, approach a magistrate, pick a favorable day for a contract. In practice, Egyptian dream culture worked like personal risk management. Sleep offered scenarios. The books turned them into decisions. Quiet tools for ordinary people trying to navigate fate without surrendering to it, like flipping open a spreadsheet for your soul.
In the Iranian imagination, the world isn't a maze of random turns. It's a battlefield with a finish line. Truth and order, Asha, pull one way. The lie, Druj, tugs the other. Fire made that struggle visible. In temples, carefully fed flames stood for living truth, hard to touch, impossible to fake, always revealing what it touches. Kings leaned into that symbolism. In court inscriptions, rulers brag less about slaughter than about following truth and crushing the lie, winding ethics into the job description. Justice wasn't a mood, it was cosmology. That worldview shaped policy. Judges were expected to align verdicts with Asha. A clean decision steadied the cosmos, a corrupt one fed Druj. Charity wasn't optional kindness. Supporting the poor and maintaining clean water, bridges, and storehouses counted as siding with order. Tax relief during famine and funds for way stations along royal roads read like logistics, but carried a theological charge. To govern well is to push creation toward repair. Even fire's strict parity rules had a civic echo. Separate the clean from the foul, keep contagion contained, respect what sustains life. The timeline stretched beyond a single reign. Stories spoke of a final renovation, often called frashakariti, when creation is purified and set right. For the righteous, that last trial would feel like warm metal washing away dust. For the harmful, the same river would burn until the harm was gone. Not a door slammed forever, but a furnace that refines. It's a stark image. And it explains why law codes, charity, and temple practice point in the same direction. Discipline now, restoration later. Even empire took its cues. In Persia, to govern was to guard cosmic order. A king's legitimacy flowed from alignment with truth, a city's health from fair measures, honest weights, and protection of the vulnerable. Light the fire, keep it clean, and tend the world. A daily ritual doubled as a statecraft syllabus. Measured against that arc, victories are temporary, but justice accrues. Slow heat working on stubborn ore, until what's crooked softens and can be set straight. When knowledge and faith pulled in different directions, where would you have stood, with the reader of omens or the keeper of laws?
In the streets of Jerusalem and the market towns of the hill country, prophecy didn't stay in libraries. It stepped into traffic. These were not court astrologers whispering to kings. They were poets with grit in their sandals, calling out skewed scales, evictions, and bribes taken at the city gate. Their message cut against the grain. Temple songs mean little if the poor are squeezed. Sacrifices ring hollow if courts sell verdicts. National security, they insisted, isn't forged by walls alone. It starts with justice. Officials preferred pageantry to repentance, so the critique had to get visual. A preacher might shatter a clay jar in front of elders to show what invasion would do to a city that shrugs at the vulnerable. Another marched the streets with a wooden yoke across his shoulders to warn that alliances won't save a nation bent on exploitation. These acts weren't stunts. They were portable parables, felt before they were understood. And when a king burned an inconvenient scroll line by line at his brazier, the scribe simply took dictation again and produced a longer version. Power could scorch parchment, but it couldn't extinguish the argument. The prophets didn't only predict collapse, they diagnosed the habits that make collapse likely. Swollen estates swallowing family farms, judges dazzled by gifts, leaders trusting chariots in treaties more than truth-telling. Their timeline always ran two tracks, judgment and hope. If the city bends toward mercy, disaster can be postponed. If not, exile is the logical end of breaking social bonds. Yet on the far side of loss, they pictured a repair. Courts reset, land returned, fasts that feed instead of starve, worship that looks like shared bread. What makes these voices durable isn't a list of future dates, but a moral audit that still scans. They took the nation's pulse at its wrist, market stalls, threshing floors, court benches, and declared that the health of worship is measured in the treatment of strangers, widows, and debtors. In that calculus, true security is ethical. A city that guards its waits and widows guards itself. Divination had hardware. When decisions sharpened, war, succession, treaties, courts didn't settle for a hunch, they reached for instruments. The Baru priest, a divination specialist, led a sheep to the altar, spoke the formulas, and laid the warm liver on a board scored with zones. Each feature, finger, path, gait, the swell of the gallbladder, served as a dial. A clean passage meant the way was open. A scarred gate hinted at ambush. Scribes sketched the organ on clay, not as art, but as a map, annotating quirks for the archive. Some models carry tiny labels pressed beside the features, a pocket atlas of fate that could be studied, compared, and taught to apprentices. Casting lots worked the low-tech end of the spectrum. Kings and households alike used marked sticks, pebbles, or knuckle bones to force a choice when councils split. The premise wasn't randomness, but appeal. Let the god decide between two live options. If the first throw clashed with a recent sign, protocol demanded a second method, dream inquiry, an oracle in a temple court, or another liver, because convergence mattered more than a single roll. None of this was slapdash. Procedure was the spine. The animal had to be unblemished, the prayer sequence precise, the examination timed to the minute so heat and moisture didn't distort a mark. Reports from Assyrian archives read like lab notes: place, weather, sequence, interpretation, recommendation. Notice how often a cautious phrase appears: favorable, yet the finger is split, postpone until the new moon. Evidence that ambiguity didn't paralyze the system, it disciplined it. Even the clay models tell on their users: a nick where a knife regularly rested, a darkened patch where oil pooled lesson after lesson. Signs of repetition turning ritual into methodology. In that world, a king's bravado bowed to procedure. You didn't march because you felt lucky. You marched when different instruments chimed the same note. Lots, livers, and oracles weren't three rival camps. They were a circuit. The power lay in triangulation, in the humility to test a hunch against a rulebook written in meat, stone, and memory.
The ancient vocabulary, tribulation, unity, rebirth, hasn't vanished. It's been translated into dashboards. Climate stress reads like a modern time of trouble. Rivers arriving too early, storms clustering where the records said they rarely go. Governments brief with satellite fire maps and drought indices the way palace scribes once unrolled eclipse lists. When those colors shift from yellow to red, cabinet meetings move, budgets get rewritten, and a festival becomes a relief center overnight. The sky isn't delivering omens, but the feeling is familiar. A pattern changes, and you change your plans. Globalization fulfills old unity dreams with caveats. Cargo, code, and culture loop the planet in hours, yet the same channels carry contagion and rumor. A rallying story, we'll rebuild, we're one network, can bind people to action. A corrosive one can dissolve trust just as fast. That's why institutions practice scenario planning. Hurricane tracks overlaid on hospital capacity. Cyber attacks rehearsed like fire drills. Food supply shocks gamed with shipping schedules and harvest forecasts. An ancient court waited for a favorable sky. A city council waits for the models to converge. Technology has become a new class of sign. Machine learning systems scan markets, weather, and traffic, predicting bottlenecks or blackouts. Epidemiologists read wastewater like tea leaves and raise alarms days before clinics fill. Search patterns spike in a neighborhood, and pharmacies reorder before anyone calls a supplier. It's not magic, it's correlation turned into choreography. Data that nudges behavior before pain arrives. The eerie part is what sits side by side. A satellite soil moisture map in one pane, bond spreads in the next, as if harvest and fate still share a ledger. None of this claims that a tablet foresaw smartphones or that a prophet plotted a pandemic curve. The continuity is humbler and more useful. People build systems to notice trouble early and to justify restraint when the drumbeat says, go. Ancient prophecy managed uncertainty with rituals and rules. Modern governance does it with sensors and simulations. In both, wisdom is the same quiet habit. Watch widely, weigh carefully, and let the pattern, not pride, set the pace.
Give a human brain noise and it starts stitching. Faces in rock, animals in clouds, intent in coincidence. That reflex, spotting patterns fast, wasn't a bug in the ancient world. It was insurance. If you're hurting on the edge of a storm belt, missing a pattern can kill you. Seeing one that isn't there just wastes a day. Communities leaned toward connection. Prophecy systems formalized that impulse, turning hunch into procedure. So a leader could say, "We waited because the signs agreed," and keep a jittery army from charging too soon. Memory tilts the scales. We salt away the hits, let the misses fade, and retell the dramatic ones until they become public weather. A king delays a campaign during a bad lunar month, a rival city collapses anyway, and suddenly the calendar looks wise for a century. Meanwhile, the quiet days when nothing happened slip out of the archive of conversation. You can see the bias in the tablets themselves. Confident lines on entries that proved useful, cramped corrections where reality forced a rethink. Emotion makes patterns feel true. Ever seen a stock chart dip and felt your stomach drop? Same reflex. Fear sharpens attention. Relief blesses the explanation that calms it. A dream book that flips a terrifying image into a favorable outcome sends a farmer to the fields with steadier hands, and steadier hands harvest better. Outcome confirms belief. Belief steadies the next decision. Even physiology joins in. The small pleasure when a pattern clicks is real, like spotting a friend across a crowd, and that reward teaches you to look again. Narrative seals the deal. Stories with cause and consequence are easier to remember than charts of probabilities. Ancient texts wrapped rules in tales. Neglect justice, city falls. Guard the poor, community endures. Because stories travel where spreadsheets can't. Modern dashboards speak in lines and colors, but we still translate them into plot. Rising curve as villain, mitigation as hero, turning point as Act 3. Prophecy, then and now, rides the same neural rails, a way to turn an unruly world into a path you can walk without freezing at every fork.
Literal fortune-telling draws the eye, but the durable value of ancient prophecy sits one layer deeper. It's a manual for behavior when certainty disappears. Read the warnings as algorithms for character, humility before big choices, fairness in markets, patience when signals conflict, generosity under stress, and you start to see why these texts outlived the rains they addressed. A forecast about harvests fades. A habit of leaving gleanings for the poor endures and steadies a village through thin seasons. The wisdom isn't a date, it's a discipline. Governance learned the same lesson. Courts that standardized weights and guarded the weak didn't just avoid divine anger, they reduced volatility. Leaders who delayed action until independent signs converged weren't timid, they were managing worst-case risk. Even the pageantry of rituals had a practical core. They slowed impulsive decisions, created public buy-in, and turned fear into steps people could take together. You can sense this in the margins, the careful correction beside an eclipse time, the tidy recalculation of an unlucky day, tiny marks of institutions teaching themselves restraint. Reframed this way, prophecy reads like civic hygiene. Keep measures honest, let fields rest, cancel debts on a schedule, treat strangers as future neighbors. Each practice dulls a crisis edge before it cuts. Modern planners would call it resilience. The old texts called it righteousness. Different language, same outcome. Fewer brittle systems, more room for recovery. And there's a quiet, almost domestic wisdom threaded through the grand visions. When dreams threatened dread, manuals flipped their meanings and sent people back to work with steadier hands. When kings faced ominous skies, councils built procedures that spread risk so one bad night didn't topple everything. That's the lesson worth stealing for the days ahead. Don't chase certainty, build capacity. Use stories to bind a community to careful habits. Let patterns advise, not rule, and measure success not by omens satisfied, but by how many people can eat, sleep, trade, and pray in peace when the weather turns strange.
Remember the vanishing king from the intro? Here's the trick. Assyrian courts sometimes used the substitute king rite, Shar Puhi, when eclipse omens targeted the monarch. A stand-in, one letter even names a gardener, was briefly enthroned and fed as king while the real ruler went into ritual seclusion. Priests watched the sky until the omen's power was judged to have passed. Then the substitution ended with purifications and a grim coda for the stand-ins. In their logic, the predicted harm had been absorbed, and the state continued. That night began like any other. Watchers logging the moon's bite, a courier at dawn, a protocol unfolding. Robes, processions, petitions to the decoy, silence around the true king. The archives don't gasp, they file it as procedure, yet the neat timings and careful hands betray the stakes. Power didn't submit to fate, it built a buffer. We still do, minus incense. Markets strip circuit breakers, governments install acting officials, hospitals run surge plans, forests get controlled burns. Different costumes, same design. Insert a fire break between omen and outcome, so one bad signal can't topple everything. Read that way, ancient prophecy isn't fortune-telling. It's architecture for restraint, habits that slow decisions, widen vision, and keep communities intact when the sky looks unfriendly. Not superstition, design for resilience. If this reframed how you see prophecy, tell me which practice surprised you most or where you've spotted a modern substitute king. Share, comment, and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more Past with a Pulse. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next dig. Now jump to your next stop. Hieroglyphs are not what you think they are for the home front, or the full Ancient Middle East playlist for the big picture. Both on screen and linked below. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, tomorrow has always been ancient. Their omens were written in clay, and their fingerprints are still on our future.